here. Anyway, confirmation, we'll look over that again when we get done here. But your local NRCS office will have those soil survey books. This is your study guide. It's the same study guide that DEQ has online. The only difference might be, look at the back, you have a lot of clickable links back here that you can get a lot of good soils information from. The main one is going to be the one right there on the last page. That's the Louisiana Natural Resources Conservation Service. Y'all already know who your local NRCS guy there is, and he's going to be your best source of local information for all things to do with soils and natural resources. And all these links are pretty much soils and land use based. But the more you look through them, the more that you're going to realize your understanding of the other natural resource disciplines in Envirothon, forestry, wildlife, aquatics are all heavily influenced by soils. So the more you understand about soils, the better I think you're going to be at all those other things. And one of the things you're going to see recurring, a theme that's going to recur in all these links, is going to be conservation planning, where you don't regard any one of these natural resource disciplines by themselves. They all mesh together and are regarded together. But and the quicker you get to that point, the easier learning all this stuff is going to be. Well, anyway, for your study guide here, we're not going to pick it apart and belabor you with detail, but I will let you know what's going to be on the Envirothon test and on soils and land judging tests anywhere, not just Envirothon. Envirothon, you're going to have to be able to learn to discern soil horizons. Have you ever heard of soil horizons before? First time you hear it. Soil profile. Never heard that either? Well, a soil horizon is basically a delineation of distinctness in a soil profile from top to bottom regarding color, soil texture, and structure. Soil color, we're going to talk about that later. You're going to have to learn to distinguish soil color and use it to characterize a soil. Soil texture is relative proportion of sand, silt, and clay. You've heard of each of those things before, but we're going to learn more about what those different particle sizes mean and how distinctly soils are depending upon the various combinations of sand, silt, and clay. But we're going to do that, and that one's going to get your hands dirty, so we're going to do it last. Soil structure, you don't get tested on, but it's important to know a little bit about soil structure because so many other key soil properties are influenced by soil structure. So looking back at soil profiles, I'm going to give you this back now. These are 3 soil monoliths that come from different parts of the state, and it's written on the back where they come from. This one comes from the furthest northern, even more northern than y'all. This one comes from Richland Parish on the Macon Ridge, and it's a loess soil. This type of soil was actually wind-blown into the state after the last glaciers receded like 10,000 years ago. And that's one of the key ones. And you can tell by looking at it, even though it's a dry monolith, that it's probably more uniform in texture and structure than these others. One of the main differences are going to be soil color. You can see how the color changes top to bottom, and soil structure. Looking at the horizons in your little diagram right here, you have an O horizon, and you can see the description of an O horizon there. Organic horizon of undecomposed and decomposed organic matter absent in cultivated and many other soils. Many other should read almost any other that's utilized. In other words, whether it's being cropped, gardened, mowed, burned, grazed, whatever, the more heavily that soil is used, the less of an O horizon you're going to have because that organic layer is going to be depleted. When you see a soil monolith or profile like this, you see that grassy and rooty looking stuff on the top? That by itself does not constitute an O horizon. It's the kind of thing that an O horizon is developed from. An O horizon would be mainly a darker area of soil in the profile. So in none of you won't have an O horizon in any of these monoliths. It's unlikely that you'll see them in many soils pits in land judging classes unless you're told or can look at the landscape that the pit is on that it is a fairly unused area and hasn't been cropped or grazed at all in recent history. Otherwise, an O is unlikely. Mainly, you're going to be looking for A horizons and B horizons, and the distinction between those two. at the Envirothon for the test, you're going to be asked to discern or delineate where the A horizon, which is going to most often be your uppermost one, where it ends and where the B horizon starts. Now right here in your description, the description of an A horizon is going to be the mineral surface soil which has accumulated decomposed organic matter, usually darker colored than lower layers, usually. Also the horizon that has lost organic matter, clay, iron, and aluminum due to downward movement. Then B, mineral horizon that usually has a finer texture, more clay-like, or darker, stronger, redder color, and a distinctly different developed structure. We're going to talk about structure in a little bit. So mainly, we want to know where the A horizon or topsoil ends and the B horizon or subsoil begins. So, and this is real quick, based on what we just read and looked at right there, the description of the diagram, looking at this monolith and this profile, point out where you think the A horizon on this profile ends and the B horizon begins. And if you have to, look back at this little bit of information right here and see if y'all can come to some conclusion on that. I think you would be right in there. And you can see that the A horizon, the color changes from top to bottom. It's darker, almost sort of blackish or dark gray up top, dark brown, and it fades out to a tan. But you can see that the texture, just by looking at it, is pretty uniform until you start where you just indicated with your pencil. Texture begins to change and the structure begins to change as well from there on down. Now coming over to this monolith right here, this one, I'm sorry, looks a little different, doesn't it? See how rounder and smoother most of the soil profile is here? Already, doesn't it make you think of some sort of hard clay possibly? So it's pretty fine. It's going to be a pretty fine textured soil down there. Up here looks like it's a little loamy and maybe coarse from here on up, doesn't it? You can tell just by looking, the texture is going to be a little different. Now that soil came off the Macon Ridge up in Richland Parish. This one, it's going to be written on the back, and I have to be careful doing this. This is a Tula soil from St. Helena Parish. Every soil has a name just like you do, and all the things that you'll learn to do to help classify or distinguish soils, you're trying to narrow that classification down to a specific name. They all have names, and they're usually named after the area that they were first described in. So anyway, based on what you see here and what that little bit of information gives you about distinguishing soil horizons, do the same thing on this profile. Where do you think the A horizon ends and B horizon begins? Remember, you're looking at color largely, but not exclusively. And this isn't a test, so just give it your best shot. You'll get graded later. I think you would be right, and I think I would come up a little bit, and I know exactly why you're thinking, yes, right there. And a lot of kids say A horizon ends here, B starts. Well, A horizon ends right here, and B begins from there down. Thing is, the texture and structure of these two areas, not completely uniform, but pretty close, but you can see that there's another little change that goes on right here, right? And you notice that. Right, and then it becomes finer, and the structure changes from there on down. What I would classify this as, and you don't have it on your study guide, it is on the test, and it's an option for the students, is an E horizon. E horizon is only a leached out bottom portion of the A, but it's still A horizon. So that's why you only have O, A, B, C, and R down there. Point is, this is all A horizon, but if you were to derive a second phase into the A, it would be this E, which is a simply leached out portion of the lower A horizon. The more information you look at online, the more you see about discernation of soil horizons. You're going to see mention of A, but you don't see it everywhere. And it isn't important in a lot of soils and land judging competitions because you're still only looking at the A horizon, just a different phase or element of it. So if in the competition on the test, on the multiple choice options, you see an E horizon option and you see what you think is an E horizon in the pit that you're asked to do your judging from, you can enter it and you'll probably get it right. I won't count anything against anyone if you don't regard an E horizon because it's not in your test material. The most significant thing is know the A from the B, and you showed already that you know that. So even as different as that looks color-wise, everything else is pretty much the same, and the real change in the soil texture and structure begins right there, and y'all notice that. That was pretty good. So this is A, B is down here. And you'll notice that in the B, it's going to change. There's going to be a lot of phases that occur further down in the subsoil or B horizon, as long as you know where that A horizon stops. That's the big thing. Now let's look at this one. This is going to be a Conscien silt loam, which comes from just down the river here in St. James Parish. All the talk you hear about fertile river deltas and the soils there producing crops so bountifully over centuries, this is probably the soil in Louisiana that's been most productive from an agronomic standpoint. Now on this one, you can see that the soil texture doesn't change a heck of a lot from top to bottom, right? Where would you think the A horizon ends on this one? Right in there, and I think you would be right. And the color is certainly uniform, and you can see the texture and structure begin to change. Like it becomes a little more fine, possibly right in here, and then from there on down with the coarser stuff up top. That was pretty good. Pretty good. So anyway, you understand a little bit about soil horizons now. So remember, this is just a monolith, and it's what we're doing here for the training. But when you're standing in a soils pit, you're going to be looking at a wall of this, given whatever soil type you're going to be in at the time, and you're going to see lots of variation in that. But just know that you're going to be given an area, probably the width of this right here in the soils pit, to make all your judgments and discernations from that one little area. So anyway, that's just a quickie on soil horizons. It's not necessarily next, if I can see your study guide. It's not necessarily next in here, but one of the things we're going to look at, we're going to look at soil texture later, the proportion of sand, silt, and clay that we talked about. But since you get so dirty doing that, we're going to hold it off till last. One of the next things we're going to look at here is soil slope. Texture and slope are two of the features, land features, that are most critical when you're judging a land's capability for different practices. Mainly different types of development or agriculture, forestry, habitat enhancements, whatever it may be. Slope is really important, and so we're going to do that next and go over just some of the very basics about how to gauge soil slope. The soil slope categories, there they are. Nearly level, gently sloping, moderately sloping, strongly sloping, steep, and very steep. And you can see that there are elevation changes per 100 feet that are used to distinguish between each of those categories. Nearly level is land with less than a 1 foot elevation change in 100 feet. If you measure out 100 feet and measure the elevation change up or down over that distance, if it's less than a foot, it's nearly level. If that change is 1 to 3 feet in 100 feet, gently sloping, and so on. Given those percentages or changes in elevation, that helps us, along with soil texture, determine what those land use capabilities are for that given landmass. And we regard these as percent slope. If we have a 1 foot elevation change over a 100 foot distance, we'll call that a 1% slope, okay? So if we have a 3 foot elevation change across 100 feet, what percent slope is that? 3% slope. 3 foot elevation change in 100 feet would be a 3% slope. 5 foot elevation change in 100 feet, 5% slope, okay? So we'll go from that. Given Those two key factors and a few others, if you go back into the study guide, and you're going to do this on your own at home and at school, you'll see all these different land capability factors, major factors that affect land capability. Surface texture, soil depth, soil slope, erosion, permeability, and surface runoff. Most of these things are influenced by slope and texture. Soil depth, you're going to be asked questions about soil depth at the Envirothon. Soil depth is not the depth of the pit, it's the depth of suitable soil for root development and other things that you'll see fairly defined in here. How deep the soil pit is not an indication of how deep the soil is. Just know that. All right, so now, knowing a little bit about soil slope and how we figure or define a percent slope, 1% slope would be a 1 foot elevation change over 100 feet, right? Now let's go over here and exercise a little bit about how we gauge those elevation changes. And it's pretty simple, and what we're going to use today is a hand level. Our natural resources people, soil scientists, what have you, use hand levels in the field a lot. You see a lot of surveyors use these expensive tripods and surveying instruments. We don't need that for what we do. It's nice to have, but if we're just trying to get elevation change, we don't need anything that refined. This is a very old hand level. A soil scientist in Montana gave me this years ago. And it's pretty basic. This is your light window, okay? That's the top, the uppermost part of the hand level. The small ocular is the one you look through, and when you look through it with your light window up, you're going to see a little panel on the left side of the viewer in here with a black line across it, and there's going to be a bubble, just like in a level, going up and down in there. You want to keep rocking this thing back and forth until that black line is splitting that bubble in half. Do you understand? And then you're going to be looking at a survey rod while it's level. That black line that's splitting the bubble in half, while it's splitting the bubble in half, you want to read the mark on the survey rod that that black line is on. That's going to be your first elevation measurement. Now, before we do all that, why don't you take turns looking through this so you kind of know what you're looking at. And make sure that little light window is up and that you don't cover it with your fingers. Do you see the little panel on the left? Do you see the black line? Do you see the bubble? Keep moving it up and down slightly, and eventually that bubble is going to come into view. The bubble should be moving up and down on that panel on the left. And you want that bubble to rest right across that black line. The black line should go right through the middle of the bubble. It's kind of hard to make it still, isn't it? Working? Now let her look through it now. Do you see everything?
Yes, sir.
Now, knowing what that looks like here, one of you will stay here with the level. We're going to come on down here. Stand right here at this line. One of you stand here, and you're going to be the instrument person. Another of you is going to handle the rod, and Theron's going to tell you how to do that. So why don't you handle the instrument? Oops. You handle the instrument first, and she'll handle the rod. You stay right here, and you can't move. Your feet have to stay in the same place, because if the instrument person moves from where her first measurement is taken, it throws the next measurement and your percent slope off, and you won't get an accurate reading. So the instrument person has to stay put, and what we're going to do is just pace off a distance. We'll call it 100 feet. And when you're pacing something off, and if you're wanting to go a known distance, it pays to know what your stride is at a normal step. For some people, that might be 3.5 feet. For some, it might be 2. Depends on how short your legs are. So it doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is let you pace off, and for interest, just for interest's sake, see how many steps it takes you to get to that orange flag over there. It's not 100 feet, but we're going to pretend for today that it is, because 100 would get us out to where we couldn't see through our scope. So why don't you just go ahead and pace out to that flag over there, and we'll get started.
Are you going to explain this and he's going to explain that? Do I need to be in two places at once?
Yes. We'll do it again whenever they come back.
Okay.
And basically, I'll say right here, what Theron's showing her is that that rod is measured in inches. Most surveying rods are not. They're measured in tenths of a foot. So between the 5 foot and the 6 foot marking, you would have 10 increments rather than 12. This one's got 12. It's something most kids are familiar with, so we don't get into tenths of feet yet. And he's explaining that there's going to be a level that you hold onto the rod that he's showing her now, the little orange thing, and it's got the bubble eye in the middle so that you know when the rod is perfectly level, which it has to be to get the most accurate reading with the level here. Then he or she, once they get that rod level, will hold a finger on the rod, which Theron I think is about to indicate. She's going to look through her hand level, and whenever she gets her hand level onto a mark on the rod, she's going to say higher or lower. He's going to move his finger higher or lower until his finger is right on her mark. Then she'll say stop. That's going to be the reading for our first elevation.
Okay.
And I think, y'all ready? And what she's doing, there's a little tiny bubble in there, and if we could show this on the camera it would be great, but I don't think we can. It's really hard to maintain a level instrument, and steady-handed youngsters are usually better at it. Her finger. See her finger that's on the rod, her highest finger, her left finger. You want it to go up or down until her finger is right on your mark.
Okay. Up a little bit.
You might have to help there, and up.
Okay, that looks like pretty good.
Right there. So he's going to get the mark, and he's going to call it out to us, and ideally there would be someone over here or there with a pad recording this. What did y'all have? 5-6. 5-6. Well, stay right where you are. They're going to move up. Closer, and now you do it again. Same thing again. She's good right there?
Down just a little bit. About right there.
4-9.
4-9. And 5-6. So what's the difference?
4 feet 9 inches from 5 foot 6 inches, right?
Well, so you can even count on here if you like. So 4'9", right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches difference. The elevation between this spot and the first surveying location.
And we said already we're pretending that's 100 feet. Looking at the slope categories we saw earlier, gently sloping was anything less than 1%, right? So that's less than a 1% slope, so it's gently sloping. So we already know what our slope category is given the soil that we're about to go texture. Do y'all understand this well enough, or would y'all like to switch? Would you like to hold the rod and she do this?
So it would ideally be 100 feet for the
Yes.
long. What would it be when they come closer?
Anything that's near enough, instead of coming straight on like this, a lot of times the rod person, the instrument person will stay still. The rod person, instead of coming straight on, could just as easily go to the side or at an angle, as long as you're confident that you're getting the right measurement to ascertain what your slope is over that distance. It doesn't have to be 100 feet. You might only have 70 feet to measure, you would still get the proper ratio to get the percent slope that you need, given the distance and the elevation change.
So I just take it out or?
It's just easier to
like
do
to.
100. And the instrument person's eye level is pretty much the benchmark. And he's explaining her the same thing you got over there a while ago.
Level is off, but the rod is on an angle, so you're not getting the proper elevation. So you want that rod to be plumb or true, up and down. So you want to keep that bubble inside the circle. Okay. Now you're also going to use your finger as the to hold the spot when your classmate tells you.
Point to it.
Right, and she's going to tell you whether to go up or down that, and whenever you. Okay, we're ready. Okay, so you're at 5'3". Okay, remember that number. Let's walk back up. Remember, keep the rod level.
Down.
Okay, 4'6" from a 5'3". So what's the difference?
From what was it just now?
4'6", 5'3".
Here's
One count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 inches. Difference in elevation, which was the same that you got. So y'all did pretty
Even
good.
though the height of your eyes are different, which was the benchmark for each of you, those difference was identical. And really, that's good quality control. That's getting it done right. So you understand the basics of gauging slope. Nothing to it, really. And it's pretty much the way it's done in the field. The instruments don't look the same. So we know that we have a gently sloping land area right here. Is that yours? There you go. Now, understanding slope and how to measure it, we'll come back up here and look at some other soil factors that you'll need to know for the test. And like I mentioned earlier, soil texture is important. You're going to be tested on it, but we're going to do that last because that's what gets your hands the dirtiest of what you're going to do here. So hue, value, chroma are the three factors in designating a specific soil color. And there's a lot of soil colors in here. Wetland soils or soils in ditches or drainways that rarely ever dry out usually take on these kind of bluish or greenish colors, but most other oxidized soils are going to be some shade of red, yellow, or some variation in between. And the hue is always written at the upper right hand corner of the page. Value is here on the left margin, chromas across the bottom. And when you look at these tabs all across here, those are the hue plates. You'll see they vary from 2.5 YR. YR is obviously yellow to red. The smaller the number, the less yellow to red in the YRs. So it's 2.5 YR, but it looks a lot more red than anything, right? We go to the opposite end of the YRs, which is 10 YR, a lot more yellow to red, so that it looks mostly yellow. And we have also an R plate, which the hue is only in the red frame, and we have a couple in the Y, only Y, in the yellow frame. So to start out, that's your standard Munsell soil color book, and you're going to have to use this on the test. One of you grab that. If you were to go out into the field and be given one of these 3 soil samples, and you're thinking, well, I have that whole book to look through, where do I start? Well, you start by generalizing the soil color. If you glance at these, you're seeing 3 different general colors, right? What does that one look like mostly? Reddish. Kind of gray, so it's kind of in between.
Yellow.
That's kind of yellow. And they're all local. They come from within 50 miles of where we are right here. And to gauge or key out the soil color, ideally, you wouldn't want it to be so dry. That's pretty dried out. In the field or in the lab, you would use a spray bottle to kind of dampen the soil sample like that. See how much darker it got? You don't want to get it so wet that you muddy it up and make a giant mess. You might, but that's okay, and it's okay, but all you want to do is dampen it, and you see how much darker and richer that color got immediately. That's more what it would look like coming out of the ground, and that's what you want to key out. Then, since it looks mostly red, you would probably go to one of the low number YRs or to one of the R plates to begin looking for your color. And the way you do that is, if the end of my finger was a soil sample and I came over here and wanted to find out the color of my sample, or better yet, let's say a roux. You were making a roux for a gumbo and you were trying to tell somebody else the perfect color for your gumbo roux. You were using a Munsell color chart to do it. Trust me, soil scientists do it all the time. And actually, most soil scientists, they measure they think a perfect roux is that color of that color plate right there. So if you were to relay that color to someone else, you would do it this way and write this down, because soil color delineated any other way would be incorrect. First, you write down the hue, and you go to the upper right. Remember, the hue for this is going to be 10 YR. Just as you see it right there in the upper right. Then you would backslash after the R, and you would come down to value next. So you would have 10 YR backslash, what would be the value of this chip right here? Right there. Value is right, the number's right here on the left. The hue is 10 YR, the value would be 3. That number right there, because we're using this color chip. So then what would the chroma be? 3. 10 YR backslash 3 backslash 3. That's the color of a perfect roux. So, let's say we had a little daub of that roux and we didn't know what color it was going to be. We just knew it kind of looked like it would fall on the 10 YR. What you would do, same as you would with the soil sample, is put it on the back side with the sun to your back and move it around until you had your soil sample on the back side next to one of these openings nearest the best matchup in these color plates. And there again, if your matchup was, say, this one right here, that color would read 10 YR / 7 / 2. You would record it that way. So now, using each of these 3 soil samples, use this book to key out the colors designated just the way we talked about, all right? And I mentioned putting the light source to your back, but we really don't have one here, so it doesn't matter. you want, you can take the page out of the book if it makes it easier. Just make sure you put it right back where you took it. So it's up to y'all if y'all do that or not. Just be sure to put the soil sample on the back side. There you go. Y'all figuring it out?
Okay.
There's paper towels over there.
Here's the one of them. If you want to rinse your hands off. Is it good? All right. You'll want to rinse them off in a little bit. So did y'all do all the colors? What did y'all get? Read them to me.
For the yellow one, we got 10YR 5/8. And then I think we did the reddish one second. We did 10R 3/4. And then for this one, we did 10YR 3/4.
So you got two off the 10YR page, and then the other was off the 10R. Okay, pretty good.
When you write that, make sure there's a backslash in between the 10YR and 5.
So it has to be like right there.
Yep, a backslash between between hue and value, and between value and chroma, just like what you have there. Pretty good stuff, y'all. Now, soil texture. We mentioned it at the very onset of this little session. It's the proportion of sand, silt, and clay, right? And oops,
Where's your mom at?
that's going to be fairly up front in your study.
I've been trying to call her.
This little diagram right here tells you all you need to know to learn how to texture soils. And again, texturing, you're figuring out the proportion of sand, silt, and clay. And Theron does this a lot better than me, so he's going to help you all with that. And coarse would be sandy, right? Rough stuff. Fine would be the finest clay. And as far as going through this and how to do it, I'll let Theron explain it to you.
You put your papers down and grab a sample of this soil. Now, when a sample of soil is extracted from the earth in its original form with all the soil aggregates, it's not going to be pliable like it is right now. Okay, so the students ahead of y'all kneaded the soil kind of like Play-Doh and made it to where it was so pliable, which is what you need to do when you try to ribbon the soil. So the first thing you would do when that soil was extracted is knead it and play with it like you would when you were younger with Play-Doh. Okay. Fortunately for y'all, it's already done from everybody ahead of you. But what you want to do is break up the soil aggregates that are holding that soil together. Okay. That's the point of kneading it. Once it's kneaded and it becomes this, the plasticity is such where it's all moving around very easily. Then you want to use your thumb and you want to push some soil between your thumb and that forefinger. Okay, and what you're doing is measuring the amount of ribbon, or the length of ribbon that you're getting from this. And you want to see how long of a piece you can get before it breaks. first piece I got, which is somewhere around 2 inches, roughly. And I'll do it again to make sure that that wasn't outside of the norm, but with that same sample. And I'll ribbon another piece. So my second piece is roughly about the same length as my first piece. So I'm fairly confident that the ribboning test, and it takes a little practice. But if you look at your study guide, that a ribbon that is over 2 inches is going to be considered a very fine texture, a fine texture. A ribbon between 1 and 2 inches is a moderately fine texture. Okay, so which one do you think, based off of my ribbon, what texture are we looking at? Moderately fine. That's what I would classify it as. So what does that tell us about the composition of this soil? What's in it? What's the makeup, generally speaking? If sand is your coarse, clay is your fine. So sand is coarse, your silt is in between, and your fine soils are clay. If you have a moderately fine texture, what do you think the soil makeup is? Now, so what you're trying to figure out is how much clay. Where are you in that spectrum of sand, silts, clay? Correct. So if it's a moderately fine, then you may have some silt and clay mixture in this soil type. Okay. So if it doesn't ribbon at all, then it's a coarse. And if it doesn't ribbon at all, you can use this other test, and you can put it in the palm of your hand. You can rub that soil around. You can feel the actual individual grains of sand if it's a very coarse soil. Okay. So your sands are you can actually see the individual grains of sand, right? Silts, not so much. You could see them maybe with a magnifying glass, strong magnifying glass. But with clay, you would need a microscope to see the actual particles because they're so small. Okay. So that's what this test is, trying to determine where you are in that spectrum of sand, silts, and clays. Okay. And dirt don't hurt.
Their hands look too clean. Have they done this yet?
They have.
Okay.
So that concludes that test, the ribbon.
So, what did your soil texture here in this sample? What did it come out to be? The kind of thing you'll be asked on the test is to do this, and you did it. You'll be given a slope, but you figured one out for yourselves here, and that it was gently sloping, a less than 1% slope. So given, say, like a less than 1% slope with a moderately fine textured soil, you'll be asked to address certain land use scenarios with conservation practices or land treatments, whichever you want to call them, that would be best for the land use scenarios you're given. All that information is going to be back here. You're going to have it all right here. So, seems kind of boring, but don't let it be. It can be fun, and you're going to notice that you're going to start paying attention to this kind of stuff as you're going down the road and seeing it on cropland, in pastures, hayland, at construction sites, or even timbered areas while reforestation or site prep is going on. What's that slope? What would that soil texture be on that slope? Are they doing the right thing? How would it might be done better to prevent erosion? What have you? Anyway, all those scenarios and land treatments are in here. It's the kind of thing you want to learn. And I mentioned earlier about how interconnected all of these different disciplines are. You're studying them separately, aquatics, forestry, wildlife, soils, but all of those others depend on the condition of the soils and the land features in the area, including slope. An example would be, I'll tell you what, I'll bring the book to y'all. Hold this. Web Soil Survey is the internet-based soil survey manual where you would go to find a map of where you are, what the soils are there, and you're given all this information, bam, on the internet. That's handy as can be, and you've got a link to the Web Soil Survey in the links here. But you're going to be asked at the Envirothon to use an old school hard copy soil survey like the old guys like me and him had to use when we first started. There was no Web Soil Survey. The benefit of a hard copy soil survey is that when you're out in remote areas, which doing this kind of work you're oftentimes going to be, you may not get a cell phone or computer signal. You're going to need this. So what you're going to be asked to do are neat little things like find where you are on the main map in the soil survey. And by main map, you've got a couple maps here. There's one here where all the maps in here are sectioned out and numbered like this. And let's say we already know that we're in block 20 right off that river right there. I'm not from Webster Parish. This is a soil survey of Webster Parish, so that may very well be the Dart Sheet, Bayou Dart Sheet. We're going to say that it is. As a matter of fact, I think it is. So let's just say we're here in section 20, right off Bayou Dart Sheet right there. So let's flip over. All these maps are numbered. See the numbers up there? We said we were in 20, so let's go to it. We're going to do this quick. As soon as we're done with y'all, y'all are going to be done. Here's 20 right here. And we said we were right off Bayou Dart Sheet. Actually, it's not that, it's a slough, but we're close. Let's just say, hypothetically, we're right here on this ridge right here. What are those letters right there? GR. That's the designation of that soil name. So let's see what that is. And we already established that all soils have names, right? We're about to find out what that one is. GR. We're going to come back to our map, and usually we're going to find that little legend somewhere around here, and it's right here. GR, what do we have?
Gore, silt, loam.
So it's a gore. G-O-R-E is the name of that soil, and we already know silt loam. It's pretty much giving us the texture group that it's in. So we got name, texture, and it even tells us what % slope we can expect from a gore. What does it say?
5 to 12%.
5 to 12, so that's a lot steeper slope than we just measured. Let's say that you're given a scenario on a gore silt loam, given that slope, you're going to be asked to plant herbaceous grassy species and legumes for wildlife habitat enhancement. See, we're getting into another discipline now. We're wanting to enhance wildlife habitat for, say, a certain deer population, and we have to plant a certain type plant for it. What are the limitations of that gore silt loam to enhance that type of habitat in that area? You're going to be asked those things, and you have to learn how to use these reference charts in the soil survey where there it says tables. And this is a new one for me too, because if you look in different soil surveys, these tables aren't going to look exactly the same, but they're going to be generally similar. So we already said we wanted to plant grasses and wild herbaceous plants, right? Didn't we kind of say that? Here they are. What are the limitations for potential for wildlife habitat elements, grasses, legumes, and wild herbaceous plants on a gore? So let's flip over till we find gore silt loam. Very poor for grain and seed crops. So we're not going to get much out of that. We were going to try some habitat enhancements doing grass planting on that gore. This is telling us, despite our best efforts, things may not go so well. I'm sorry, that was grain and seed crops. Grasses and legumes, gore is going to be good. Herbaceous wild plants, good there too. So it may not be the best, but we should be able to accommodate some pretty good habitat enhancements toward these two habitat elements on that soil type given that slope. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how you use a soil survey. Not much to it. Your local NRCS office is going to have some copies of these old surveys in there. Try to get your hands on one, but also go online to these links on the back of your study guide. There's going to be tons of good information there. The main one right there is going to be the NRCS agency link, and you can link to a number of good, useful things, including web soil survey there. And contact info for your local NRCS office can be linked to through the directory at that website as well, so that you can call those people and bug them for your own old hard copy of the soil survey for your parish. All right, y'all, that's it. Right? Unless y'all